damos la bienvenida a esta conversación que estamos teniendo acá en Congreso Futuro 2025, donde nos preguntamos qué humanidad queremos ser. Recordarles que estamos en esta semana de enero recibiendo a grandes personalidades del mundo de las ciencias, de las humanidades, de la filosofía, para discutir justamente esto, el futuro que debemos seguir de acuerdo a lo que conocemos hasta el momento. También recordarles que en TV Senado y en todas sus plataformas pueden encontrar las distintas charlas de los más de 115 expositores que nos acompañaron y también estas entrevistas donde podemos hablar en profundidad con aquellos invitados que nos visitaron. En esta ocasión tengo el placer de presentarles a Charlyne Smith, quien es física nuclear, científica también me cuesta decirlo en inglés, pero es el Electrical Power Research Institute en Estados Unidos, en Washington. Así que le damos la muy bienvenida a Charlyne. Charlyne, welcome to Congreso Futuro and this interview.
Thanks for having me.
You are talking about a very sensitive issue, in Chile at least, because a lot of people have a prejudice against nuclear energy. So my first question will be very simple. What is nuclear energy and if it's safe or not? We will discuss this for sure.
First question, there are big questions, at least on the second half. So nuclear energy, simply, right, nuclear reactors produce energy through a process called fission. And what that means is that you split an atom to release heat, and then that heat heats up a surrounding body of water, and then that water turns to steam, and that steam is used to turn a turbine, and then that turbine is able to connect to the generator to produce electricity.
So basically we are heating water to move things and generate electricity.
Precisely.
Then one can imagine there are several ways of producing energy. Particularly in Chile, we have huge solar panel or solar areas like the Atacama Desert. We are producing green energies. Mm-hmm. Why would we need to think about power plants or nuclear power plants?
Nuclear power plants provide, they distinguish themselves from other energy sources because it has a really high capacity factor. And what that means is that you can have these power plants running continuously uninterrupted. So if you're wanting 24/7 energy, you really want to assess energy sources that have a really high capacity factor. For nuclear, that's more than 90%. So when we're talking about leveraging the benefits of nuclear, we're talking about applying that technology to very energy-intensive applications that require that 24/7 energy demand. We're talking applications like data centers, right? We're talking applications like mining, desalination, hydrogen production. And so those core industrial processes that require a lot of energy to be constant all the time, nuclear energy provides a specific and unique offering in terms of those applications.
Yeah, for those who, I ask this question because we in Chile produce a lot of energy from solar panels.
Yes.
The problem is that the sun is only there for a few hours. Can wind or other solutions supply this or produce enough energy during the time that is not sun?
Yeah, of course. And I should say foremost that I think it's important that we have a diverse energy mix, because the more diverse our energy mix, the more resilient your infrastructure. So if we have a bit of solar, we have a bit of wind, we couple that with any base load firm energy. In this case, let's just talk about nuclear really quick. Balancing those increases the resilience of a grid in the event of, let's say, you have a situation where you have this massive solar plant, right? And there is a tornado that comes through, destroys the plant. You've lost maybe a gigawatt of generation. If you don't have firm base load, then your next dependent energy source would be wind, which would not be able to make up essentially for all that lost generation. And so when you're talking about building out an energy mix, you want it to be diverse, so you have many barriers of security, if that makes sense. And so in particular, I think solar is great. Solar produces energy during a specific time of the day. And that's great for homes, offices, schools, most of which are active during the day. But when we're talking about, again, 24/7 energy, you really want to look at more more energy sources that have really a high capacity factor. And I know that Chile has, a lot of renewables, and Chile has been a leader in building out renewables so quickly and so efficiently. But what we've started to see with that build out is that during the times when we're getting or receiving power from solar energy, during a specific time of the day, prices, because it's a lot of cheap energy, right? You have all this cheap energy hitting the grid all at once. The price of energy really just drops, plummets. And so if you go to a solar plant producer or operator and say, well, we now have 65% capacity of renewables and we want to build more, there's no incentive for them to build more solar plants if it costs no money, if they're not receiving any type of return from the cheap energy because it's gone all the way to zero.
There are so many interesting points that you mentioned in the last few minutes, but I would like to go step by step because you mentioned first resilience. I think that's a key part. You need to be redundant, right? I mean, if earthquake strikes and destroy the solar panels, then you need a source of energy, right? In this case, nuclear energy could provide like an alternative or like constant energy production. So how important is this diversification of the energy matrix?
It's extremely important because you want to be able to have a nice mix that can effectively be flexible enough to ramp up and ramp down depending on what the energy need is, and do so very quickly. Right now, Chile is mixing thermal generation with renewables, and there is a bit of difficulty in smoothing out the variability from solar plants when you have a drop in energy output. The thermal generation plants, they can't respond as quickly to basically smooth out that variability. So in terms, again, just going back to your questions, there's so many things I want so many nuggets I want to drop here, but I have to pace myself. In terms of resilience, you really want to have many different energy sources. And by virtue of you having many different energy sources with their own benefits, right? Solar, I mean, we have the sun, right? No other energy source is going to give you the same benefits as solar. Same thing for wind. Same thing for even natural gas. Same thing for any other energy source, including nuclear energy, right? And I think what you need to do when you look at a particular region and its needs, you really want to effectively balance all the attributes and the benefits and the risks associated with different energy sources, because you can't escape risk. Risk is associated with any technology, anything you do. And so having the right balance to maintain reliability with resilience and safety is really what the approach that I think should be taken.
Definitely. That was very clear from your side. Thank you. And I will take the other point you make a few seconds ago was about the price cost. I mean, the cost of producing energy. You said that during some hours during the day, we produce so much power with the solar panels that the cost of energy, so if you produce an extra watt, then it costs basically zero. Then why to produce it? Why we should produce with other technologies like wind or nuclear or solar? I mean, what we are wasting energy, how it works that we reach this floor of zero. Can we save it with batteries, for example, if we produce more? How would be this trade?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you bring up a good point. Batteries. Batteries are a good way to essentially save or acquire that generation so it's not necessarily lost or wasted. And you can deploy it over a short period of time. So it's a nice complement to, I suppose, solar and wind in particular, because while generation is high and you have a surplus, you really try to store as much of that generation as you can so that you can release it over the night, for example. But again, I mean, you need energy for various things. Electricity, energy spans transportation, it spans different industrial processes, it spans a wide variety of things. But I think in Chile in particular, and in my view in many parts of the world, that have immense renewable capacity, that should be built out today, tomorrow, immediately, right? But not ignoring the fact that that build out of renewable energy sources is going to require support and contingencies in the form of firm energy sources. And the nuclear industry is very difficult because it takes a long time to build. It can be it's expensive. And so if you have a country that's interested in nuclear, has no nuclear power infrastructure, while you are pressing your foot on the gas, building out renewables, you have your finger on building technical human capacity that may be required when you're ready to introduce another energy source. And for newcomer countries to nuclear, I think that's exactly what they should be doing, because more nuclear mature countries like the US, the UK, and Canada, they're already advancing their technologies. And the likelihood is that they're going to be the ones that are going to be manufacturing these small modular reactors, these modular reactors, manufacturing them at scale, right? And so those countries, unfortunately, are going to take the brunt of the cost in terms of a first-of-a-kind technology, right? Nobody wants to be first when it comes to a first-of-a-kind. Everybody wants to be second, third, and nth. And so while these nuclear mature countries are building out their small modular reactors and microreactors, newcomer countries to nuclear who are considering nuclear energy are working on their workforce. They're developing that human capacity. So by the time you can build efficiency, while the nuclear mature countries are building efficiency and economies of scale, the prices will drop to a point where when Chile or any other newcomer country is ready, that they have the technical capacity ready to go to be deployed.
That's very interesting. I mean, I hope, nuclear energy can produce a lot of energy during other times. I was very interested in one of your plots during your talk, that you showed that in Chile we produce a lot of energy during the day with some wind, from hydrology, right, from rivers. But then the fossil energy is still very large fraction. Would nuclear energy could provide like an alternative to this fossil fuel during nighttime, especially?
Oh, well, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of projects that are being assessed all over the world to look at trying to place these small modular reactors, these new technologies, at decommissioned coal plant sites. So I know Chile has announced that they are going to be decommissioning their coal plants. And as a way to maintain that infrastructure, I think what would be interesting to look at, especially for Chile, would be to look at a coal to nuclear project from a decommissioned coal plant, because a lot of the infrastructure is right there, because it is, after all, a power plant that's producing power. The difference would be switching out how the heat is produced, right? And so leveraging the sites that you already have instead of trying to build new sites, build out new infrastructure. It's a bit more expensive. Leveraging the existing infrastructure that you have. If your goal is to decommission all these coal sites, why not reuse them? If you're considering nuclear, try to do an assessment to see what that could potentially look like.
Yeah, totally agree. A lot of people that is looking at this interview but Chile has earthquakes, tsunamis. Is it safe? Absolutely. I want to keep that question for the next vlog because we need to do a short break.
Okay.
Keep it in mind. Tenemos que hacer una pequeña pausa, pero vamos a volver porque seguramente se están preguntando, ¿será segura la energía nuclear en un país sísmico como Chile con otros desastres naturales? Bueno, justamente de eso vamos a hablar cuando volvamos aquí en Congreso Futuro junto a Charlyne Smith, quien es justamente física nuclear y que trabaja en el Centro de Energía de Estados Unidos de Producción de Energía. Así que nos vemos en unos minutos más. Ya estamos de vuelta aquí en Congreso Futuro 2025, enfrentando la pregunta de qué humanidad queremos ser. Y sin duda el tema de la energía es uno que nos impacta a todos, pues cada vez necesitamos más energía. ¿Cómo la obtenemos de manera segura, de manera limpia? Es una gran pregunta y por ello es que estamos en esta tarde conversando con Charlyne Smith, quien es física nuclear de EPRI en Estados Unidos. Y justamente nos habla de cómo podemos ir hacia un futuro nuclear que sea seguro. Charlyne, I just left a question for you. We sometimes are afraid of nuclear. We have heard of disasters. Chile is a country where natural disasters happen all the time. Why should we bet on nuclear energy? Is it safe for us?
I love this question. So, yes, Chile is a seismically active area. So are many other countries that have nuclear power plants. But when I try to explain to people the engineering, the over-engineering that goes into designing a nuclear power plant, because they have to be over-engineered, they contain radioactive material, right? In terms of earthquakes specifically, nuclear reactors are designed and built to withstand earthquakes, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say something that maybe people may gasp at first, but I will explain. There have been no earthquakes that have caused significant damage to any nuclear power plant since the first nuclear power plant went online. And I know some people are probably thinking, I don't know what she's talking about, Fukushima, right?
Yes, exactly.
Let's just talk about Fukushima for a second. So there is a lot, Fukushima was incredibly impactful, people, and even in Chernobyl and in 3 Mile Island, and we can get into the mechanics of those accidents as well. But in terms of Fukushima, when the 9.1 Tohoku earthquake hit Japan in 2011, all the nuclear reactors shut down automatically as they were supposed to. In fact, there are 4 individual power plants that were along the eastern coast of Japan that were in proximity to the earthquake. Fukushima wasn't the closest to the epicenter. There are 4 power plants. Fukushima is maybe about the third one that was away from the epicenter. Now, all the reactors at all 4 power plants shut down, including Fukushima, shut down automatically as soon as the earthquake hit. Yep. Because we have analysis and design that goes into the design. The challenge with Fukushima was that the emergency cooling systems were placed in the basement, right? And what that means is that when a reactor automatically shuts down, it triggers an emergency cooling system. Why? When you shut down a reactor, it stops the fission process, so you're no longer splitting atoms to release heat. So you've ramped the power all the way down, but not to zero, because you're still producing heat in the reactor through radioactive decay. Mm-hmm. And so because you're still producing heat through radioactive decay, you still need to cool the reactor. So once a reactor automatically shuts down, it triggers the emergency cooling systems. Again, the problem was that it was in the basement, so the following tsunami that came after the earthquake flooded the cooling systems in the basement. So the reactors had no way of being cooled. Now again, there are 4 power plants. Fukushima was one, there were 3 others. And all the other power plants, their cooling systems were located above ground level. And so their cooling systems were able to keep those reactors cool. Fukushima suffered the fate of an accident, not because of the earthquake, but because of poor nuclear power plant design, right? And in effect, it's the tsunami that triggered that sequence of events.
Yeah. So we learned about this, but we have Chernobyl, you said 3 Mile Island, and we have also volcanoes. How can we be sure? Because that's the thing, it's frightening. We say nuclear disaster, and it is a disaster, right? We still see. So how can we be sure that there will be no accidents, or how can we sure that it will be safe?
Basically. I love these questions. So as a part of my talk, I mentioned that when you're designing a nuclear reactor, you do something called probabilistic seismic hazard analysis, right? And that analysis takes into account the earthquake history of a particular location, seismology, and the geology, right? So in terms of when you have, say, for example, an earthquake, right? You have the ground accelerating, and you have a measurement of a value that we call peak ground acceleration when you have earthquakes. we specifically design these plants to be able to respond if it reaches peak ground acceleration, a marker, then it automatically shuts down. If you have a small enough earthquake that is designed to just keep running, keep operating, it's below the required peak ground acceleration. But in the case of Fukushima, if it's above the peak ground acceleration, then the reactor is going to automatically shut down. So these are some of the engineering that goes into trying to make sure that we look at worst possible scenarios, anything that you can feasibly imagine. We design reactors to withstand it, including if there was an airplane that crashes into a nuclear power plant. It's in our safety analysis and in the design to be able to withstand an airplane impact.
Wow.
So there are a lot of things that are taken into account when we're designing a reactor. In particular for earthquakes, probabilistic seismic hazard analysis is the key.
Okay, so even if it's convinced by your argument, which I think is very convincing. I mean, if it can sustain a plane crash, it sounds pretty safe. But then, what about the waste? Because you mentioned fission, so we have radioactive nuclei that will become radioactive nuclei as well, and you waste them. So how we save them, how we keep them away from people. In Chile, we have things called relaves, with the disposal of mining are very hazardous, right? I mean, they affect communities.
Yeah.
What happened with power plants? What do we do with the waste?
Yeah, a lot of different countries have different solutions, I should say, to dealing with the waste. And I'll start with my favorite, France. France has been taking out that spent fuel out of the reactor, recycling it, and putting it back into the reactor. So they've been recycling their spent fuel for decades, right? And I think I mentioned a stat in my slides that 10% of France's electricity comes from recycling that spent fuel. Now, other countries like the U.S. in particular, the nuclear industry as a whole is a very highly regulated, very strictly highly regulated industry. In the U.S. does not commercially recycle, but the military does recycle spent fuel. And so all the spent fuel that is produced at nuclear power plant sites, they're stored in dry cask storage on the sites that they're produced. But again, all of that is an energy resource, because if we take all the spent fuel from 60 years of nuclear power plant operation in the U.S., you could fit all of that waste in Estadio Nacional less than 10 meters deep, right? And so I just want to talk about recycling just a little bit more here. If you put uranium in a nuclear reactor, you extract the energy, and you take it out. The first time you take it out, that spent material is going to be radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, that's too much to waste.
It's too much, right? So when you take it out, 96% of that is reusable. Okay. And so I like to think of it I like to use a tape analogy. If you have a tape and you pasted a poster on the wall, the first time you pasted it, the adhesive is really strong, it's holding your poster. Let's say you don't have any more tape, but you want to put up another poster, you reuse a tape. The second time you reuse it, the adhesive is not going to be as strong, but you could put it up. Then you want to do it again with a third poster, reuse the same tape. Every time you reuse the same tape, your adhesive gets less and less strong. Yeah. It's the same way for spent fuel. So when you take it out of the reactor for the first time, 96% of that is reusable, but also it can be radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years. If you take that, reuse it, you are slowly reducing the radiotoxicity of the spent fuel, and you're also reducing the lifetime. So studies have shown that if you recycle spent nuclear fuel to the maximum point, you go from having spent fuel that's radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years to only being radioactive for hundreds of years. After which, we can bury it in a deep geological repository. And what's interesting about nuclear waste is that once you bury it when you bury it in the geological repository, unlike any other waste from any other industry, for example, nuclear waste takes care of itself because that material is undergoing radioactive decay all the time. So by the end of that by the end of that period of how long it takes for all of those radioactive materials to decay, you get down to zero radioactivity. So in the same way, we take the material out of the ground to produce energy, and we return it to the ground to continue to radioactively decay as it was before we picked it up out of the ground. The waste, the radiotoxicity takes care of itself.
But during those times, can something happen? Or because we've seen series like Dark or The Simpsons where you see like leakage of the things. Like I'm putting the worst examples that because I mean it's what pop culture
Yes,
says,
of course,
right? I
of
mean,
course.
you have the disposal in the rivers and all that. That never happens, or it has happened.
So when people think of nuclear waste, they think of the green goo from Simpsons.
Yeah.
That's really not what nuclear waste looks like. Nuclear waste is solid steel, solid metal,
Okay.
right? It's not in the same form that it goes in these metallic tubes, right, encased in steel. The same way they exit, solid form. And so when you bury nuclear waste, you're putting them in very thick casings, and then you're putting them down a tube in the geological repository, and then you're backing up all that material with sediments and concrete, so it stays in place, and it also helps to shield the radiation. The ground is a great place for radiation shielding as well. Water is a great radiation shield. And so when you talk about encasing the fuel in steel and then covering it in sediments and then blocking that entire tube with cement, again, we're over-engineering for the protection of public health and safety and the environment.
I see. I mean, I think you've convinced me, and you can probably convince a lot of people about this. It sounds very safe. It sounds like a really promising future for energy. Thinking about that, I mean, I have one last question.
Sure.
In Congreso Futuro, we are talking about the future of humanity.
Yes.
What humanity do we want to be? Do we want to become? What's your thought on that?
Ooh, that's a big, big question. I would like to see humanity more or less reflected, I think, a lot in the Chilean culture that I've been able to experience here, where people are kind to each other, and even strangers, right? I haven't personally experienced that culture anywhere I've visited, and I think humanity, we need to get to a place where we can empathize or see ourselves in other people's lives or circumstances, because we're all experiencing life, right? We're not experiencing it in an equal way, as in we don't have equivalent experiences, but we're all going through that journey. And I think having empathy and support for each other, I think, is where humanity needs to be. And for me personally, that means, even though I've moved to the U.S. to pursue a career in energy, I'm a nuclear engineer now, I'm working at the Electric Power Research Institute, I try to take all the network, all the skill sets, all the technical knowledge I've been able to acquire, and I bring it back to Jamaica to host these engineering boot camps, to hold these STEM boot camps, to be able to share that information with students and the population who otherwise would not have access or the support to be able to do that. And that's something that I've taken initiative to do, because it's something that I'm very passionate about. I had the opportunity to come to the U.S. to pursue a career, to get my degrees. I have cousins and friends in Jamaica who are immensely intelligent, but just don't have the support and the opportunities to reach for the stars. And a part of the role that I'm playing in Jamaica is trying to be able to go back and help to build a critical mass of technical talent in Jamaica, because the future needs. That's what the future needs.
Yeah, you're certainly inspiring. I hope you inspire some kids here in Chile as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you very
100%.
much, Charlyne, for your time and
Thank
for
you
being
for
here at
having me.
Congreso Futuro.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a Charlyne Smith. Recordemos, ella es física nuclear, científica de EPRI, del Electrical Power Research Institute en Washington, Estados Unidos, y estuvo acompañándonos aquí para conversar un poco más sobre energía nuclear y el futuro de la energía en Chile. Estamos en Congreso Futuro 2025, nos estamos despidiendo por esta vez, pero recordarles que discutimos preguntas importantes como qué humanidad queremos ser y que en las redes y plataformas de TV Senado pueden encontrar la charla completa de Charlyne Smith, así como de los más de 115 expositores que pasan por el escenario. Les damos muchas gracias nuevamente y nos vemos en una próxima entrega de estas conversaciones con expositores de Congreso Futuro 2025.